I'd like to call the Planning Capital Programs Committee meeting to order. First item of the agenda, I'd like to turn this over to Carly for a few comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pond. Just a quick comment. I wanted to introduce everyone. For those that don't know Josh, Josh Rowan has joined Marta as the Deputy General Manager responsible for capital programs and expansion innovations. And Josh, if you could just stand and say a few words. Whatever makes you comfortable. This is the last time you'll be comfortable in this room, so just
Well, the second time in here, I had presented previously in a past life. My name is Josh Rowan, as Colin mentioned, Deputy General Manager. Bring a pretty extensive background of project delivery in the metro region. In many cases, Atlanta has been my career. So very happy to be with Marta, very happy to be working with the strong team on the capital project side, and look forward to getting to know all of you a bit. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Welcome aboard. First item of the agenda is approval of the previous minutes. Can I have a motion and second for that, please? Okay, we have a motion by Snyder, second by Jim Durrett. Can we vote? The motion's approved. Next item is a resolution authorizing the execution of the intergovernmental agency agreement between Clayton County and Martyr for the program coordinator position, and that will be led by Manjeet Rao.
Good morning, everybody. So we can go to the next slide here, and that's the only substantive slide for this presentation. So this is an intergovernmental agreement proposed between Marta and Clayton County to allow for a program coordinator on the Marta Clayton program. So that's the expansion program in Clayton County involving the Clayton County South Lake BRT, the Clayton State High Capacity Transit Corridor, the Clayton County Justice Center Mobility Hub, and other similar projects planned for Clayton County. And this position is important because of the amount of work that we would be doing in Clayton County. It's a type of work that jurisdictions are generally unfamiliar with, and this is a liaison to help coordinate county departments and also be a resource to cities in Clayton County. And unlike GDOT, which generally controls the right-of-way in which they're working, Marta generally does not when you're outside of a railroad right-of-way. We're working within city streets, county streets, and state highways, and so we're asking permission for lots of different things to advance projects. And having the coordinator on board helps to facilitate that communication and coordination, and also meet turnaround times and milestones. So it's very much well valued. You see there, compensation is $260,000 annually for a term of 3 years, up to 2 one-year extensions, and this position would be funded by the funds that Marta has for the Marta Clayton program, and but the position would report to the county chief operating officer in Clayton County. These types of positions have worked well in my past life at LA Metro in coordinating with some of the 88 cities that exist in LA County and trying to move a transformative program forward there across many different jurisdictions. So with that, my colleague Peter Andrews is here. We work together on this intergovernmental agreement with Clayton County, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Could I get a motion for approval, please? Motion by Durrett, second by Mr. Frison. Any discussion, any questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
So the bottom line of this says that the compensation is $260,000?
So actually, I'm glad you noticed that. That's a typo. It's $230,000. It's reflected correctly in the resolution and the intergovernmental agreement. And that is a fully burdened compensation, so it involves all of the costs, not just salary.
I mean, I'm curious to know what an equivalent position at an equivalent jurisdiction would cost, because that strikes me as a whole lot of money for someone who reports to the chief operating officer at the county and is a project coordinator.
So it's similar in position to directors here at Marta in the Capital Programs Expansion Innovation Division.
So if we don't like the person or we don't approve of their performance, do we have to keep them if we're paying for them?
That is something that we would definitely would want to work out with the county collaboratively.
It's not the first time we've done this, though, is it?
That's correct. There is a position with the City of Atlanta's More Marta program.
And,
What's the pay for it?
yeah.
That is a good question. We're still working on numbers with the City of Atlanta.
Okay, and so when we compare the City of Atlanta's program and the size of the City of Atlanta's capital program, I'd be curious to know how the salaries of the two positions compare.
We will get that information for you.
Okay, thank you.
You doing a
Gee,
good
that-
job, Ron? You doing good?
No, I'm just trying to figure out why we're paying $250,000 for that job.
Yes, Rita.
So if there is a equivalent position at the City of Atlanta, we aren't sure of what the salary is?
There's a backlog of invoices that we're working with the city on to obtain. So that's why we're working on the numbers with them.
So how long has that position been at the City of Atlanta, and we aren't aware of what the salary is?
Since the inception of the program.
Pardon me, I
Since
can't,
the inception of the program, so several years.
and we don't know what the salary is.
So, if I may, the cost of the City of Atlanta More Marta position is roughly about the same as what the Clayton County position is. The difference is with the More Marta position is they have numerous consultants and other folks on their staff to assist and supplement those services. Whereas Clayton County, this is, we're creating a whole new situation, a whole new transit person for them. So this person will have a little more responsibility than the ones at More Marta Atlanta, if that makes sense.
Right, I understand. I guess my question is, if the position has been in place and someone has been functioning in that position over X amount of years, how could we not know what the salary is, what the cost
Right.
per
So-
year has been?
Yeah, we're supposed to be billed on a monthly basis. At this time, the city is covering that with their general fund. We will get eventually a true-up, if you will. The first few months, we did get invoices, and then as positions changed and individuals changed in those positions, that has slipped off the radar. We have had ongoing conversations about getting that corrected, and we hope to get that corrected in the near future.
But we can get the answer. We just don't have that readily available to us in terms of how much they're getting paid, but we can absolutely, even by the end of this session, get a sense of what that salary is. And then the other thing I'd point out, and Manjeet touched on it, is when we look at $230,000 annually, because it's fully burdened with all the benefits and all the overheads, I don't know, Luz, if you have any, off the top of your head, any experience in terms of what percentage increase that normally is, but it's a substantial increase over the actual salary that the person is drawing.
As previously indicated, this will be roughly the equivalent of a director level position in the capital program, fully covered, meaning with including pension costs, health benefits, and any other associated costs.
So we just don't know what that number boils down to right now, but we'll get that and make sure that we're comparing apples to apples when we get back to you about the City of Atlanta.
So hearing that, the salary could be the salary itself without benefits, insurance, pension, or is that inclusive of the total amount?
This number is inclusive of a total amount.
Inclusive of.
Yeah.
I recall,
Thank you.
I recall that number was around 40%. It's been some time, but so it's 1.4 times salary is probably where that'll land.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Durrett.
Just since Catherine and Roberta aren't here, I want to say on their behalf, I think this is a great idea. And, you know, expansion in Clayton County is so very important, so I support this.
Okay. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things. One, would you be able to give us a breakdown of the salary? I know it's fully burdened, but can you tell us what the actual salary itself is in terms of the compensation minus or separating from the pension benefits, health care, and all that kind of stuff? The other piece is, so, let me think. Well, that's all. I'd like to see a breakdown of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Aquino?
Yes, so thank you for the clarification on the number on the slide and what's in the resolution. I will just mention for Peter, it looks like the number that's spelled out in terms of the monthly reimbursement and what's in the parentheticals in the resolution doesn't match.
Yeah, we did notice that. We did send a cleanup, but it doesn't look like the cleanup version actually got to you all, unfortunately, both with the slide and with the spelled out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
One other thing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Reggie?
Who's going to get to, I know this person is working for the county, but who gets to hire them? Is it the county that searches them and then actually interviews them and hires them?
The county and Marta are looking to work with the collaborative firm to do the hiring on that, subject to Marta and Clayton County approving that person.
Okay, is that part of our intergovernmental agreement with them? Or is that, how is that articulated?
Peter, if you wouldn't mind giving Peter a moment. He's
No, so the IGA doesn't speak to that, because candidly, you know, while we are paying for position, this position is reporting to Clayton County. So, you know, we want to make it as arm's length as possible. But it is my understanding that what Mr. Renew just said is accurate, is that the collaborative firm is working to fill this position. We do have a relationship with collaborative firms, so does Clayton County. But at the end of the day, they're hiring a position to provide, you know, their services, and we're just funding it through their 1 penny sales tax.
Okay.
I do not anticipate a situation where, you know, they would bring somebody in that we would say, we can't work with this person, and they would hire him anyway. This has been collaborative from the get-go, and we anticipate it to continue that way.
I got you. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Ash?
So, I understand the importance of having someone embedded at the county who can help coordinate these projects and move them forward. And I agree with my colleagues that delivering the service and the transit enhancement for Clayton County is vitally important. I would ask that we make sure that the intergovernmental agreement, A, provides us the opportunity to terminate not just the intergovernmental agreement, which it does on its face, but B, that if we're paying for this person, that either the contract be structured so that it's clear that if we terminate the IGA for convenience, that the person who is employed is not a third-party beneficiary of the IGA and thus has standing, arguably, to sue us for termination of it, or that the contract give us the express right to terminate the person. I'm fine with us spending the money we need to deliver the projects we promised to deliver. I just want to make sure there's accountability in it.
Understood. I do believe with the termination for convenience and the fact that, you know, anybody employed under this is, you know, deemed an independent contractor, I don't think they'd be considered a third-party beneficiary, but we can tighten that language if you'd like. As far as having the ability to terminate the employee, I would go back to exactly the same conversation I had with Mr. Snyder, is I think we want to have some arm's length situation. This person is supposed to be reporting and representing Clayton County to assist us, not working for us as an embedded Marta employee. They do not have the capacity to help us get the projects done, and so we're trying to provide that capacity internally for them so that we can work to get the projects done. If we have the ability to fire that person I do believe it kind of clouds the effectiveness of that person working as a Clayton County employee versus a Marta employee.
Follow-up question to Mr. Zash. Do we have the ability to jointly approve this person before he's brought on board?
We can go ahead and, add that language if you'd like. I don't anticipate that being a problem.
Okay. Do we need to make any changes, or can we go ahead and vote on the resolution as presented?
If somebody would like to amend the motion to include the language that Mr. Ash suggested, or that, that we have a joint discussion or joint decision on the employee, we can do that.
So, I mean, I will respectfully push back on that suggestion and suggest that our crack legal department come up with language to address the concerns that have been identified, because I don't.
Okay.
I would like, I think y'all are better situated to figure out what language would make sense and would work, and I don't want to try and armchair lawyer you too much.
Why should things change now?
With, if we could get, before it comes to the full board for a vote, if we could see whatever amendment you propose, that would be great.
That won't be a problem.
Please and thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Floyd?
A couple of points. Is they're doing this at the request of Marta, is that correct? We've asked them to do this?
It was the county's chief operating officer who made the request.
He made a request to us to do this,
Correct.
right? And is the money that's going to be paying for this guy, it comes out of Clayton County's 1 cent sales tax, is that correct? Did I understand that right? So they're paying for this guy, and we're asking for controls over who they hire and what they do, is that right? Even though the money's coming through Marta, they're still paying for it.
Well, it's a little nuanced. The funds are controlled by Marta, but they're raised in Clayton County. But they're funds for Marta for the purpose of advancing expansion, among other programs in Clayton County.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Dewar?
That was the question I was going to, or the point I was going to make when I heard somebody say it's being paid for out of the tax that's being raised in Clayton County at their request. I think that's an important point for us all to remember. And I just wanted to ask Robbie how much armchair quarterbacking is too much?
Okay, in the spirit of armchair quarterbacking, I'll call the question. Computer's working slow. Let's see. I'm only showing. It passed. We need, how many, 5? Okay, motion passes 5 for, 3 against, and 1 abstention. The next item is a resolution authorizing the disposal of permanent easements in the Georgia Department of Transportation in the amount of $49,900 for traffic signal upgrades, and that'll be led by Robin Boyd. Robin?
Good morning, Chairman Pond, Mayor Floyd, GM Greenwood. The next slide, please. So this is permanent easements for traffic signal upgrades for GDOT, and it will be in 3 locations. It's on the south line. The total will be $49,900, and you can see the acquisition history is for the entire parcels that those little easements will be within. And they do have FTA interest that we will get approval before we move forward. And if you could go to the next slide. So one of the parcels is near the Lakewood station. And the next slide. The next one's a little further north near the Oakland station. And then the third slide. And then near the West End station. And the next slide. So this is a resolution requesting permission for us to grant permanent easements to GDOT in the amount of $49,900.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Can I get a motion and a second, please? Moved by Hartage, second by Worthy. Any questions or discussion? Not, I'll call the question. Can we please vote? The resolution passes.
Thank you.
The next item is a briefing. Next item is a briefing on the Summerhill Bus Rapid Transit significant change for the cost and schedule, and that'll be led by A.J. Joshi. A.J.?
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Renew, Mr. Rowan, and members of the Planning and Capital Programs Committee. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the agenda. Today I'll be briefing the committee on significant changes to the Summerhill BRT program. The quick overview of the agenda is essentially I'm going to go through what a significant change is in our IGA agreement, kind of talk about some of the governance around that, and then talk specifically about scope, budget, and schedule changes that we've experienced. Next slide, please. So we'll start with what isn't a significant change. So Marta and the City of Atlanta collaborated and agreed upon a definition of what constitutes a significant change within an intergovernmental agreement. Any budget deviation of 10% from our preliminary design estimates, it constitutes a significant change. The change typically originates in our program management team. It's submitted to a program governance committee, and then once it's approved, it actually moves over to the City of Atlanta for concurrence, so the mayor's office. And it was presented to the City of Atlanta yesterday, to their board, and now it is being presented to our board. So that's the final step. Next slide, please. And this is a federally funded project, so as part of this funding, we are obligated to do a request for a modification whenever we do any kind of significant changes to scope, schedule, and budget. So this is part of that process as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some of the scope changes that occurred on this program. Project cost changes, some of the scope changes, we kind of had 4 categories that we were focused in on. We had some requests from the city. We had some requests from Marta that came to be as we were starting to go through design. We had some new requirements that also came to fruition as we were going through design. And we also found some new utilities that needed to be moved as we were going through the due diligence process. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these specifically, as I'm going to start to detail some of those in the value engineering portion of this of my slide deck, but just some of the key areas that were cost drivers were we have a $2.6 million increase due to MMA, which is methacrylate. It's basically red coloring of a dedicated bus lane. There are costs associated with it, and it is an increased cost. We also realized after we did a geotechnical report that we needed to do a full depth replacement of general purpose lanes along Hank Aaron Drive. There were some other areas such as enhancing the bus stations themselves with new technology that was rolled into the actual figure, the bottom line figure, along with some utilities. We found a water line that was along Hank Aaron and some other areas that we needed to be moved. So we also took that into consideration along with some new requirements by Georgia Power as we were starting to do our discovery process. Next slide, please. So after taking a look at some of these new requirements, we did sit back and collaborate with our subject matter experts and with the City of Atlanta to look at some cost reduction strategies. So we've kind of outlined those here. They kind of, again, fall into three different categories. Right now, we are looking at eliminating some of the solar power and battery backup as one, for instance, that'll be one of the cost-saving strategies. We do want to position ourselves for future solar canopies, so there may be funding opportunities in the future. So we did want to go ahead and put the infrastructure in, but just not go ahead and install them at this time. Another major cost-saving strategy is to remove 2 stations. This will be the station at Capitol Avenue and at Trinity Avenue along Memorial. So those 2 were looked at. I know that as we go into the downtown corridor or south downtown corridor, we do have tight spacing with all of our stations. And those were 2 that we had analyzed, and we decided we were going to remove those, okay? So another area that we did, after collaboration with our city, with the city and with GDOT, the general purpose lanes were deemed to be outside of the scope of more MARTA funding as well as the FTA funding because they were general purpose lanes that were made more for the for public transit, or not for public transit. So that being said, that was a $4.5 million reduction in and of itself. We are working with the city, and they are looking for other funding sources to be able to do that work. It is work that needs to be done. It's just not through this program. Another area was also transit signal priority. We work with GDOT, and GDOT did, they did make an agreement with us to provide us the TSP hardware, transit signal priority hardware. So that was also a significant cost reduction. Another area that we are looking into is Mma Reduction. So that methyl methacrylate, which I always mess up, but MMA, that methyl methacrylate, we are looking at different ways to minimize our application. And so we are working with, or looking at other transit agencies to find out where we can reduce the actual application, but still be able to keep the design effect along our bus corridor, or dedicated bus lanes. All right, next slide, please. So these are some of the cost drivers, the overall cost drivers for the increase to the overall project costs. We have right-of-way acquisitions. We do have some of those scope additions, which I just mentioned. Also utilities, working with Georgia Power, as well as with the City of Atlanta Watershed Management group, were able to come to a $2.6 million increase there. And then professional services, because again, we have safety certification, we have a lot of other things that need to support this program, and therefore the number is about $8 million for that. Next slide, please. So project costs, overall changes. When we were in preliminary design, we were at $61.5 million. That's at the 30% preliminary design point. And that's what our estimate was. We have increased $25 million to $86.3 million now that we have a 90% estimate in hand. That being said, we have an additional $5 million for this full depth replacement of pavement, which we are going to carve that outside of the FTA funding and the project funding, but it is something we want to capture here for total project cost. We are at about $91 million for total project cost. So overall, the Tiger grant is funding about $12.6 million. 73 million more is coming through more MARTA program, and about $5 million is coming through the City of Atlanta through other resources. Next slide, please. So, well, let's talk a little bit about why we're revising the baseline schedule. The original baseline was optimistic and did miss a few things. There are some areas such as safety and security certification, which is an obligation of the authority when we're doing a federally funded program such as this. That is now baked into the actual baseline, the revised baseline. We've also looked at procurement and contract durations. There are durations associated with procurement. That was not in the original baseline. We did a series of workshops to kind of glean what is missing, what needs to be shaped, and we did that last October and November of 2021. We do feel like we have a much better, stronger baseline at this point. We did put in some contingency, such as 60 days for construction and overall 60 days for the project, which was not in there originally. And again, we appreciate putting in some because I am on the construction side of the house, and typically when we get baton passed to our team, contingency is usually gone by that time. So I was happy to see that rolled back into the baseline schedule. So all that being said, we are currently looking at a contract time determination schedule, and that is being developed so that way we know what the proper durations are for each element within the schedule at this point. Next slide, please. So we are paying close attention to 3 critical paths at this point. The longest critical path is for right-of-way acquisitions, which Robin just spoke about, and we are moving forward. There were some nuances to the right-of-way acquisition process that we just had to go through some different stage gates to be able to get to the end. So that right now has the longest duration, and we are working with our real estate group to make sure we're monitoring how that's progressing. The second area of concern is the EV design and procurement. So electric vehicles, currently the entire country is ordering electric vehicles. So we are watching that. That procurement cycle could potentially be extended. We are watching that closely with all of our cohorts as well, but it is something that we need to keep at the forefront to make sure that it does not supersede some of the design of the July 2025 end date, which is your revenue service date. The third critical path that we are constantly tracking is final design. We are going through the final design right now. We then are going to just go into construction and all the nuances of construction and how we're going to build out the job, include operator training, get everybody ready for revenue service. So those are our 3 pathways. Those are the ones that have the highest risk. Those are the ones that we're going to pay the most attention to as we go through this program. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at where we started. We started January 2022 for the completion of final design. That has extended 7 months to July of 2022. A lot of the reasons for that is based on some of those aforementioned changes. So we've been learning as we go. We now are refining this baseline to kind of reflect what we are actually doing. And we are targeting this July 2022 date. We've completed 100% design. We are doing some fine tuning at this stage. The award date is now January 2023. Again, it just carries forward that 7 months. We have added a month to April to the construction start date. We did that just to account for some of the procurement cycle as well, just to account for a procurement cycle and contingency. So that's another reason for that. And revenue service date at July 2025, we are still holding to that date because we do have a sunset date for the Tiger Grant that we are paying close attention to as well. So we're trying to get everything sorted by that date. And with that, next slide, I thank you.
Thank you, AJ. This certainly is an important project and the first of many, and I know everyone is excited to see some construction along that corridor very quickly. So any questions for AJ? Bill?
Yeah, I'll ask a couple of quick questions. One is, you said 10% change in overall project scope constitutes
Budget change, 10% budget change, yes.
If that 10% change stays within the contingency amount, does that affect whether you ask or advise us about the change or advise the city about the change?
I don't believe so. I think I think Peter was about to say something.
Yeah, could you just repeat that question? I'm sorry.
I don't know if I can. It was something to do with the
10% budget
contingency
deviation.
amount.
Yeah, so under the Marta IGA, if there is a 10% or a change in the overall budget that hits a certain threshold, we go back through what we call a significant change with the city through the PMT, the PGC groups, which is the project management team and the project governance team, to make those changes so that everybody knows what's happening.
Okay, but if I'm looking at this, the contingency amount is $7,000,008. So So if you used all the contingency, you could change something in the contingency and not come back. That would not constitute a change.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure of that. The other issue, I've got something we've talked about a lot around here, it has to do with bus rapid transit and the fact that on this line, we run a bus line up and down this street now. And that bus line, if I understand it, is going to continue to run. So we're going to have two bus lines running down. We got a bus rapid transit and a bus not so rapid transit running up and down this line. I think it's time that Marta begin to rename one of those, okay? Call it something else, because it looks to me like it's just in our best interest to have a different name for that. I know it's not that simple, but I think if we, as an organization, begin to call bus rapid transit something else, it would affect the way we look at it here and the way we understand it, because it seems confusing to me if you've got two buses running down the line and we'll go catch the bus over here, you know, and well, which one do you want me to catch? So it just seems to me that it's time for us to begin to talk about how to change the naming of that line.
Right, Mr. Floyd, and Marta has considered this. We do have a proposal pending. There's a whole branding exercise that's going on with the bus rapid transit line where the name would change to a singular word. At this point, it's a singular word, and we're just going through the legalities of making sure that we have access to that word, that brand, and then we're going to develop a whole palette around it, but we'll come back to you with that.
Let's leave the lawyer out of it, Ronnie, and leave him out of this altogether. He'll confuse the issue again.
I suggest we call it the bill.
The bill.
Ms. Blakely?
Thank you. Good morning. So thank you, very informative presentation. And I'm not sure if these questions go to you or to my friends up front here, but I'm really concerned because to me, it feels like we're starting to normalize overspending. And so like we are asking, the original budget, we're pretty much asking nearly $30 million increase for this project, which is like 2/3 of the original amount. And so when we're doing these original scopes, these budgets, what are we missing that we have to come back down the road and ask for 60%, 75% increase over what we originally estimated? Like, do we need to have additional people look at these, analyze these, so that we aren't in this position? Or what needs to happen?
That came up in pre-brief. Excellent question. I think Manjeet should address that, if that's okay with you, Colin.
Sure. So one of the things that we've done to improve things going forward is we've really stood up the CPMO through the Jacobs-Russell-Marta joint venture there. And so that will help to provide a look at schedule and cost. And the other work that we've done as part of building up the capacity of our organization is putting the disciplines that are involved in this in the right area. So planning and project development will be focused on planning and conceptual engineering, whereas design has a home now. It is in the Design, Engineering, and Infrastructure Department headed by Mr. Prescott. So putting the disciplines in the right place, building up capacity in the organization, standing up the CPMO, and having an independent second look at the costs will be helpful as well. And we're candidly going to see this with other projects as we move forward, because the cost estimates in our program are very low. And so we're needing to true up our cost estimates for all of our projects. The other thing we're doing is, as the board recalls, approved a contract with HDR to do a financial capacity analysis for the short term and the long term. And part of that is also plugging in accurate cost estimates. Because the program began in 2016, Clayton County's tax was 2014. And so it's been a number of years. It's time to calibrate the program. So hopefully these changes that we've done will help to catch this earlier, improving upon our risk registries as well, and building in appropriate contingency that shrinks as we get further through the design process.
Okay. Understood. And of course I have additional questions as well. So on page 5 of the presentation, with the different itemized items, the total of those items is approximately
$18 million. But when we look at our final budget, again, we're asking for close to $30 million. So what can you, or what, like, explain, or maybe this is for next month's committee meeting, how is it that there's that much of a discrepancy between the items that are presented versus the line items that are on page 8? Come on, you have all the answers.
First of all, you're talking about page 5, so that's project cost changes, scope changes, and you're asking about the discrepancy between that and page 8.
So like on page 5, if you add those up, it comes to approximately $19
I
million,
just,
right?
could you just say that a little bit louder?
It's better? So if you add up the items that are on page 5, it comes to approximately $19 million. And then our ask on page 8, the difference between the original budget and what the project estimate now is almost $30 million. So where do each of those items fall within these line items on page 8, 1, and then 2, what's the differential? Like, why aren't those two numbers the same or even close?
Okay. All right, I'll defer to Carrie. I suspect it lies in, the one is about scope changes, and the other one is a summary of scope plus, inflation and professional services and right-of-way, additional items up beyond the scope. But Carrie, can you take that through?
Yeah, that is correct. So on page 5, you've got a sampling of the scope changes. So these are just things that were asks. They were changes that were based on engineering reports, like the pavement reports, that showed that we have to do full depth reconstruction because the road had not been maintained in many, many years. So there were a number of those things. And on that page 5, you see what the ask was. You'll see in the top 2 left ones, so the one that says 2.6 million, the MMA, when we actually finally put our final cost proposal together, we reduced that to 1.4, and we did asterisk that as part of the cost reduction initiative. Under the 4.6, the repaving, that was not a cost. That was part of what we moved forward with for the FTA project because it did not serve a transit purpose, and we actually can't take that out of the Marta funds either because it doesn't serve a transit purpose per the referendum. So that has to be paid separately, and you'll see those two were asterisk. When you move on to page 7, that summarizes the 24.9 million in the different categories, and we do have line items for each additional detail that we can provide to the board for that. We have that here, but we can certainly share that as well. Yep.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And then my final question is, in our conversations with the City of Atlanta, and I'll just be transparent, I've not gotten positive feedback on this. So I'd really be curious to know how things went yesterday.
How things went at the City of Atlanta?
Yeah.
So we can get feedback on that, but let me just start by saying that the City of Atlanta is at the table with Marta as we go through these changes. So this has been a group effort right from the outset. And so, Carrie, if you have any insights in terms of what the folks Stacy's hearing from, whether there's a disconnect between them and the people that have been working on this with us, that may be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So the meeting that was held yesterday was with our Atlanta board members for the Marta board. So we did have a pre-brief that they had requested to have, and we went through this in detail to discuss any of the questions that they had. This whole cost reduction exercise, the whole cost increase exercise, the schedule workshops, they have been with us side by side. We have, as we noted, there's a PMO for the City of Atlanta, as well as other folks from the city that have been at our biweekly meetings. They are part of the discussions. They ask good questions. They actually worked with us in collaboration to develop the list of reduction items because everybody recognizes costs have increased, labor has increased, so that's kind of built in and baked into this. And then when we were looking at reduction opportunities, we were looking at places that we could cut costs that didn't
affect the customer experience and didn't affect ridership. So we want to make sure we have the most efficient system we can put out there. But there were things that, being responsible in terms of how we're spending our money, we could look at different cost reductions. So going to the PMT, at the PMT, the city is a part of that, and they're part of that group that's built, as well as the PGC, which goes up to very high levels of the city. So we have the COO, the deputy COO, the Atlanta DOT commissioner is part of the PGC. So this recommendation came forth as a group based on this presentation.
Okay.
Anything else, Stacey?
Not now. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Friesen?
Yes, I had a question. I think one of the comments has to do with the safety and security piece of the budget, the certification piece that wasn't considered when they did the original budget. It's my understanding, isn't that required when we have federal funding for these projects? And I would think that these would already be a part of the project we ought to be considering up front when we do the budgeting.
Absolutely, that is a part of these projects. And going back to what Manjeet had noted, these estimates were done long ago.
Oh, okay.
This was the very first FTA grant project in a very, very long time. And those of us that are familiar with working on these grant projects, FTA requires us to have a holistic, all-in project cost. That's everything from agency costs, your soft costs, from the scheduler we have doing schedules in-house, to all your design consultants, to training your operators. Those operators will be charging our project to do that training. That is not something we normally do, and so you'll see these projects, the project costs are more than what you would have anticipated. And the folks that put them together, I think they were operating with the best information they had. But again, those of us that have done these projects before know that it needs to include a lot more.
Okay, that's fair. And it's my understanding that, Majid, that the consulting company that we got to look at analyzing our budgets and how they're put together would address these types of issues that may be left out?
So HDR will
Yeah.
be taking inputs that we provide that will be looked at by the CPMO that's headed by Carrie over there. So but those are important inputs.
Yeah.
Because that model wouldn't make much sense if we were putting in the existing estimates because they're just way low.
Okay.
So those estimates that will be vetted by the CPMO and supported by consultants, professional services that are doing work on each of the corridor projects as well as the hubs and such will all go into that model. And then we'll have an idea of what's our capacity.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. Ash?
So I want to thank staff for the hour plus that y'all spent with us yesterday, walking us through this. Ms. Blakely, I think, was referencing that before. I mean, from my perspective, I think certainly we'd like to see this. In an ideal world, you would see it come in as initially projected, but we have learned over time that when you are building in a already built upon urban environment, there's a fair amount of known unknowns that you will encounter. I mean, the worst we have I think orders of magnitude worse than this was the streetcar. And so this is, while I certainly understand disappointment and the idea that it causes concern, and I think it should continue to provoke questions and examination about what changes why and how. Marta hadn't built anything in a very long time. We are relearning how to build things. And there are going to be some growing pains along the way, both for the board and for staff. I think one of the things that was in our conversation yesterday that I will repeat is my request that as we look at soft costs, that we are provided with information that benchmarks our soft costs on these projects versus best practices for other transit systems that are building similar capital projects. Because, to be blunt, when I got here a decade ago, we're spending a bunch of money in the capital program doing a good job maintaining what we had, but we weren't building anything. And as we are shifting towards building things, I'd like to continue to make sure we are doing that as efficiently as possible. And I think part of the way of doing that, A, is to have people with real expertise in that topic on the board. I'm not one. But also to understand what it looks like elsewhere so that we can try and understand it and be able to explain it. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I appreciate the value engineering that's gone into trying to bring this back under control as well.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to echo what Robbie just said. Carrie, thank you for that presentation. It was a really helpful look behind these numbers and understanding how the increase happened. And to his point, and frankly, from my perspective, I appreciate your effort to make sure these numbers are right. As Robbie said, I think we're learning how to learning again how to do this and build things. It's going to be a great template for us as we're moving forward with these very large capital programs like Campbellton Road and the Clifton Corridor. So I really want to try to get it right. And in an inflationary environment like we are now, I appreciate the effort to try to foresee and deal with these issues now. And so as we get ready to prepare budgets for these other programs, I'm just encouraging you guys to really try and do this work on the front end to everybody else's point. And I think that you did a great job kind of fixing what was here. So thank you, and let's keep trying to stay ahead of that curve. But thanks for the effort.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Bill? Mayor Floyd?
Yeah, I think, I listened to Russell the other day say that his bid prices now are coming in 30%. Did I remember that right, Russell? 30% above what you normally expect?
The average over the last 6 months is averaging about 132% over our forecasted numbers. When you get into specialty items of some of these things that they've articulated today, you can see up to 100% increase in cost items. So we are as just acknowledged, in a very difficult place when it comes to delivering projects due to the inflationary cost. And another nuance, some of the provisions of the bipartisan infrastructure law requires even more. This is a really good notion, but is, again, a challenge with Buy America requirements, too, that will apply here to some new things that previously weren't on that list that are going to drive cost up as well. So there's a lot of tension there, Mayor, so of the world we live in and still trying to deliver transportation projects to the citizens, again, responsibly, and acknowledging that these are taxpayer dollars that are trying to advance, important infrastructure projects.
Okay, thank you. My point is that as an old contractor, when you get into a time like we're in right now, situation, you get nervous, okay? And somebody is, and if I'm a contractor and I think it's going to cost me, that I may bear 10 or 20% more of the cost, well, I'm going to put 30% in my bid to cover myself as much as I possibly can. So I'm thinking that Marta, I mentioned this, I think, to Manjeet the other day, is that Marta probably needs to begin to think about ways that we as an organization might bear some of the risk, if you will. And I'm not sure how this works, but if the reinforcing steel that I'm going to buy, when I bid it was $1,000 and now it's $3,000, and I can show that to Marta, that Marta accepts some of that responsibility for that rise rather than asking the contractor to bear it all. Now, if in fact that may not be worth the effort or even to think about, but if it is at some point in time, then I think we as an organization need to go to the federal government and say that if we're going to bear some of this responsibility, the federal government who's given us a grant for some of these projects may need to bear some of that risk also in order to keep costs down at the lowest possible rate. I mean, they're the one with the printing press in the basement up there, so they can, if they need some more money, they just go down and print it off. So I think at some point in time, as an organization, we got to relook at this, because this, I'm not sure. Contractors that work in situations like this are nervous, and they are nervous even when they don't have to be nervous. about what the cost might do and how it might bear. And if there's a way for somebody out there to think, well, how do we keep the risk, or who's bearing the risk, down to a minimum? It's something that we as an organization and maybe others need to think about. How do we share that? How do we spread that around a little bit?
There are design construction models that allow that, where you contractor basically it's a fee and you bid out the parts and it is what it is. That may or may not be an application for this particular project. So, good point. Any other questions?
Just one, Carrie, if you could speak to the potential for changes to this budget as we move into completing design and bid.
So we've actually made the modifications, the reductions to this, and this does reflect the final design cost of what's been submitted. So we've made those reductions. Obviously, there's a contingency that we're required to carry under unallocated contingency. So any future, risk we hope to take out of that particular bucket. As Mr. McMurray has noted, we don't know what the bids will look like, and again, we have built inflation into our calculations here, and we've done our calculations based on year of expenditure, which is a requirement by FTA. We plug that into our schedule. So we don't anticipate additional changes at this time, but we do have built-in contingency for the future.
Mr. McMurray?
Yeah, just to comment on Mr. Floyd's comments, there is the possibility to index certain commodity items. I'm not sure if that's being contemplated. It comes with, you do have to reserve the contingency for the upside of what, if, for your example, if steel prices continue to escalate, which steel is extremely high right now. There's some ways to share in that risk profile in project bids that may help get a better bid initially that shares a little bit of that risk. I'm not sure if that's being contemplated, but that's something we deploy not on all items, but some items, and continue to try to figure out the risk profile to get the most optimum pricing you can. So maybe that's something to be considered. I'm not sure it's allowable through federal highway. FTA may be a little different story, so may have to navigate that.
Okay. Thank you. Then no other comments, so AJ?
I did want to piggyback off of that we are doing that actually. We're working with some of our consultants to do that very thing. And we are also reaching out to larger vendors. So there's a couple very large general contractors just to find out what is your risk going into some of these larger programs, because again, the idea is for us to partner with our vendor community, get more bids, get things more competitive. So we're asking them too, like, look, what are your experiences right now doing BRT all across the country, and where are you starting to see some shortfalls or some things that you felt was unfair based on the project delivery method that you chose to go ahead and deliver that project. So we are we're reaching out to the vendor community. I want to put that out here as well, that we are going to continue to reach out to the vendor community to try to figure out what makes sense from their perspective and still not be writing a blank check, right? So we're engaging in those conversations as well.
Okay, thank you. The next item, is that it? Okay.
Yep, thank you.
The last item on the agenda is a briefing for the Clayton County Justice Transit Hub Center, and that'll be led by Shelley Pearl. Shelley?
I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Renew. Drawing a blank. Josh, good morning. Mr. Roy, thank you, sir. Thank you all for having me this morning. I feel like this is some good news that I wanted to share with the board on the progress of the Clayton County Justice Center Transit Hub. Next slide, please. So we currently have a temporary hub on the site. The purpose and need was, of course, to provide an amenity for Clayton County that would hopefully be prepared for the BRT and other modes that are going to be coming to Clayton County. A couple of the things that we hope to accomplish is to provide greater access to jobs and services and also reduce traffic congestion. Next slide, please.
So wanted to show you what we started off with, a clean slate. It was a parking lot at the facility. This is what it looked like before. The picture on, I'm not sure how you're looking at it, but the very big picture here is the existing temporary hub, and a rendering of what we're hoping to build in the next couple of years, the future Just It Hub. So this is what it looked like before, now, and in the future. Next slide, please. Stakeholder outreach, we conducted over 25 stakeholder interviews with the partners mentioned here. I'd say that everybody was very welcoming of Marta and looking forward to this project. Very good comments. We've had very good meetings with everybody, and it really has been a very successful project to date. Next slide, please. The site, a little bit about the site. As we said before, it's an existing route that we have these bus routes, 191, 192, 193, and 800. We opened the temporary hub approximately 2.5 years ago in July 2020. In December 21, they got the first vending machines in Clayton County, and those are at the site right now. Wanted to mention a little bit about the Quick Bid Hub. It's actually going to remain open during construction, which is a great thing for us. I'm not sure, and I think we had the question in one of our briefings, what method we're going to use for construction. That has not been determined yet, but we will be asking that the hub remains open during construction. Also wanted to mention that the site is secured using an agreement with Clayton County. It's an IGA. It's one that we will visit every 10 years until I think a final one can be decided on. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn there. I think Peter would have said something. Next slide, please. The concept. So we're planning for 8 bays, 2 articulated bays. We'll have staging for future electric charging. There'll be service restrooms for both staff and customers, and there'll be, for our staff, there'll be unisex restrooms that you'll see out there. There'll be an area along Postway for kiss and ride pickup and ride sharing. And again, the picture below just shows the overall site that we'll be using. Next slide, please. Floor plan, just that we'd be offering a customer service area, public restrooms, unisex restrooms for staff, a break room, telecom, a customer service area, all enclosed. Next slide, please. So where we are today is we've completed our 30% design of the plan. We're going to be moving into final design that goes into Larry's group, Mr. Prescott's group, for final design. Our project schedule, if we'll go to the next slide, thank you. Final design, we hope to have complete by April of 2023, with construction complete by May of 2024. I'm going to go through just a few of the renderings that we've come up with it. I'm hoping that we'll be able to meet the mark of, I think these are wonderful renderings to see. Ground level view, if you'll go to the next slide. This is what when the buses come in, what it kind of will look like. You'll have the bays and they're all kind of set back. Next slide. A view thinking of what it would look like at night. And if you notice the roof lines, hopefully that will accommodate some solar panels for us. The next slide. Just a view of the passenger area, and you can see where we have the building that's in the far end. And then the next slide. And a bird's eye view, and you'll see the Clayton Justice system that is still in the background. We have fencing that we'll put up just to make this a more secure area. And so our next steps will be completing the transition documents as we go into final design. We'll begin our final design, updating our cost estimates, go into construction and revenue service. And if I can answer any questions that you may have.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, great presentation, great looking project. Any questions for Shelley?
Yeah, Chairman, I have just one question. I'm so happy to see this move forward. I mean, myself and some of the other board members was in attendance when y'all did the initial upgrade to that area, and so we're glad to see that this is moving forward. But my question has to do with the design process. So now you're 30%, and so what this is telling me that you won't get to final percent until April of 2023.
Yes.
So that's a pretty lengthy, long time for a design. Maybe my expectation is that it wouldn't take that long, but I guess that's what we're working with. Is that right? You're 30% now, so final is going to take another
Between
8
now and
months.
April, it's not that long. I feel like to do a good job of finalizing the numbers.
All right.
Working with our staff. I'm not sure if it's going to be an internal design yet, or if we're going to actually procure for a designer, but I think that's unusual for a transit hub of this size.
Okay. All right, I'm just once again always concerned about the timeline and how we can deliver these projects a little bit more expediently. And I keep seeing that it is what it is, but I understand. I just want to understand why it would take so long. But thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir.
Rod, part of the problem is you have a design time for a project like this, but there are a lot of stop times in between for the collaborative reviews by the localities and all of that. So they're not working all that time on the design. So that's part of that's built into the schedule.
So what I'm hearing is that there are other entities that are in the process of reviewing this as we stop and go through the process.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that, appreciate it.
Any other questions? Are there any other matters to come before this committee? Not, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
I'd like to request a briefing for the South Fulton projects for our next meeting, if I could. Scope, schedule, budget, where we stand. Grants that we are looking at to facilitate those projects, as well as earlier at our retreat, I'd mentioned the safety concerns at Roosevelt Highway, where Global Impact Academy is. They've added another grade level, so we're increasing students. The potential for there being a fatality or some type of incident there is growing exponentially as those students increase and they continue to walk. So I really want us to focus on that if we can, or give some type of prioritization to that.
Sure, so why don't we, after the meeting, get together on an agenda, the details of those topics, and staff will be happy to bring a briefing forward to bring you up to speed.
Okay, and also with Councilwoman Rao's concerns about the bus routes, is that something that we discussed during these committee meetings, or when do we discuss that?
I'm sorry, is that the email that you sent a couple days ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that has been addressed. There was a response back in terms of the 71 and the 73 routes, but again, that's probably something that we should talk about outline, but the details of the response are in an email back to you.
Okay.
Any other matters? Not, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Operations and Safety Committee meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of the July 28, 2000 Safety Committee meeting minutes. Those are in your packet. May I have a motion to approve those minutes? Is moved. May I have a second, please? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those, please vote. We have a very brief agenda today. There are two briefings. The first briefing is on operations planning and controls overview. Mr. Bruno, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, members of the Operations Safety Committee. May I direct your attention to agenda item number 2? I'll be providing an overview of the Office of Operations Planning and Control within the Division of Operations. Next slide, please. Our organizational structure is set in this manner. We report up to the Interim Chief Operating Officer, Mr. George Wright. As the Senior Director, I oversee 3 branches. There's the Operations Planning and Control branch, Transit Scheduling, and then our Technical Training branch. Technical Training branch is different from our professional training. They train the rail operators, bus operators, maintenance techs, and so forth, so on. Next slide, please. The office has really 3 elements in our core mission. The first element is operations process, the standardization. And then we turn to Marta 2040 operations planning, and then operations initiatives and assessments. Next slide. And turning first to our operations process standardization. Over the past year in this area, our big accomplishment was the resetting, the rebooting of the management of the standard operating procedures within the operations division. We began in June of 2021, and we reviewed roughly 295 standard operating procedures. We did a complete reboot. We reviewed them for alignment to our safety protocols and to our business and work practices. And we also embedded a culture of continual review of our standard operating procedures in the operations division so that they're consistently aligned with our safety thresholds and our business practices. And then continuing with this program, in October 2021, we developed an Operations Division Compliance Manual that was released to all the leadership in the Operations Division that gave them guidance and guidelines on how to manage their SOPs. And then in November and December of 2021, we closed out the year. All operations leadership, anyone having control over employees or any business processes, were trained. The first module was how to manage, update, and revise SOPs, and then the second discussed the compliance manual. So we're proud to say that all of our operations division leadership went through the training. And then as part of the new program for managing SOPs, we began in March 2022 with our first 6-month compliance check. We randomly selected 35 SOPs from the various offices within a division, and they had to assign a frontline employee that would look at that SOP and say, is this still aligned with our safety protocols and our business processes? We're going to come back around again and do that in September. And then in July 2023, we're going to go back through all the SOPs again in a thorough review to be sure that they're revised, updated as needed. Next slide, please. And continuing with the operations process standardization, our other accomplishments in the office looked at the centralization of some key business processes. First thing we did was we centralized City of Atlanta special event approvals. We get about 3 to 4 special event permit approvals every week. So we standardized that so all 4 transit modes have a chance to review the permits, and then they can weigh in and say, you know, this is fine with us, or we're going to have an issue with this bus route, then we get back with the city. So that's now centralized. We also created Power BI dashboards to manage our operations division service and supply contracts and our uniform purchasing and allowance. And finally, recently,
we kicked off our monthly bus operator review of their motor vehicle records and status check. We're doing that every month, typically around the 15th of the month. And then we communicate that information back out to the garages, and they take the necessary action. And a few items that we have in progress is we're working with our capital programs group under Manjeet to develop a health tracker dashboard, if you will, for operations leadership. This is important for them to, to stay current and stay aware with capital projects that they may someday have to own. That allows them to set up their operating plans and procedures. Turning back to the standard operating procedures, it allows to begin to align with that new program. We're also going to be kicking off a monthly look at budget versus actuals, our financial modeling, working with Raj's group. And what we'll be doing is sitting down with every director in the operations division, going over their budget, looking for opportunities, and so forth, so on. And then finally, our operations leadership Power BI toolkit, which will be one-stop shopping for all these dashboards I mentioned, making it easy for our directors and leadership and operations to find the information they need. Next slide, please. Now moving to the second of three elements in our core mission is MARTA 2040 operations planning. We generally support all the MARTA 2040 projects, and among the ways we support is development of operations and workforce plans, concept of operations plans. We're looking at battery electric bus infrastructure on the Summerhill project. But the most important thing is we're involved with these projects, so when we hit the first day of revenue service, it performs operationally sound in a safe manner, and that's good for our customers. So it's important for us to be involved early on so we can line these projects up. Next slide, please. And then finally, operations initiatives and assessments. Again, this is supporting all 4 transit modes in a variety of areas. We took the lead on the launch of the electric vehicle program, which began service on Route 1022 on May 1st. In doing that, we pulled together a coalition of cross-departmental offices through the authority, addressing everyone's needs and so forth, so on. We are involved presently with a standing task force looking at bus operator absenteeism. We successfully migrated our transit scheduling platform from an older version of Trapeze, version 19. That's bringing us greater efficiencies in our scheduling. We also wrapped up our bus and rail fleet management plans. The rail fleet management plan was important for Ralph McKinney's group going through the current GDOT triennial. That's been updated and looks good. Our apprenticeship programs, we're looking at enhancing and strengthening that. And recently we were proud to work with the city and Trees Atlanta to come together in a collaborative partnership to help us with the various vegetation and trees along the streetcar alignment. Oftentimes those branches might grow over into the OCS wire, but through the city of Atlanta and Trees Atlanta, they've really stepped up, and it's great. Next slide. I want to close my presentation today with some people-centric accomplishments that we're very, very proud of. In the fall, under Mr. Greenwood's leadership and assistance, we began the MARTA Young Professionals Group. We had our first meeting in January. And so far, it's been very successful. There's really 2 elements to this. Every other month, 6 times a year, we have general body meetings. So we'll move around to the various garages or other areas. We'll bring in subject matter experts, and they can brief our young professionals on any aspect of the authority and so forth. We also have 3 innovation teams, and they've been working all year, kind of like an APTA leadership type format. And at the end of the year in December, they'll be giving presentations to the C team. The 3 areas that they're currently working on right now is ridership increase, internal communication, and maybe some strategies for employee retention. I'd like to ask Irene, our president of the Young Professionals, to come up and give you some more discussion. Next slide, please.
Hi, all. Thank you for having me.
Like Mr. Bruno said, the Young Professionals Group started off as an interest meeting in January, and since then has 84 members. We are actively doing general body meetings every other month, and these are some of the ones that we have done. We try to make it an effort so that it's not just headquarters heavy, but also goes through facilities so that we can get in contact with different departments, with police, with engineers, with operators. We really want this to be something that brings MARTA together, because aside from our own job, the important things in MARTA is that as young professionals, we will be the future leaders, and therefore we need to have institutional knowledge, we need to have industry knowledge, we need to have relationships with each other's networks, and also professional development. So in the past, we've done 7 meetings so far. Some of them are shown in the screen. We went to the IOC to understand what happens there. We've gone to the Laredo bus garage, and that was more related with environmental work and the environmental initiatives that have been going on at MARTA. We've had a service project with the Trees Atlanta. We had the pleasure of being in the ATL yesterday and getting to see what they do with their transit plan. And in the future upcoming, we have 5 meetings. We have some lunch and learns where we get to hear from different departments and what they do. We have an upcoming general body meeting in October where the innovation teams are going to be sharing kind of like a dry run, and it'll be a great opportunity for professional development, for constructive criticism in their ideas, and we'll also have a supporting coach that will talk about public speaking and how to improve in that. So that's the group so far. I'm very happy to be a part of it, and obviously thank Mr. Bruno a lot for his efforts. So thank you.
Thanks, Irene. Next slide. Then I want to close my presentation today with our final people-centric accomplishment, our next generation internship program that we kicked off this year, and again, very, very proud of. We've got 2 individuals, Ida and Travail. You want to stand up? Ida wrapped up her Georgia State University degree in July in computer technology. She's been working in the IOC with the folks there, Thaddeus and the team, helping them with various technology solutions and so forth. So that's been going great. And then Travail, I like to tease him. He's a walking encyclopedia of MARTA. I don't think there's a route or a turn that Travail doesn't know. And he has been extremely valuable to our transit scheduling group as we continually look at ways to serve our customers better. Travail's been out almost every day with his clipboard and his form, riding routes, talking with the operators, finding ways, how can we do better, and so forth. So outstanding work in that regard. So we really appreciate them, and we look forward to continuing this program. I hope that in the January timeframe we can get with our human resources group and maybe expand this next year, and because I think building the future leaders in the operations division is important. So thank you, guys. Okay, next slide. So with that, Chairman Worthy, I'll say thank you, and I'll turn the meeting back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruno. And I want to, on behalf of the board, I want to thank all of y'all for your hard work with your internship. That's really impressive stuff. Any questions, Mr. Mullis?
I have a comment and a question. I also want to echo the congratulating you and pulling together young people to get them involved in this facet of transit. We have on the board a nurse, Frida, and I like to tell people, post-pandemic, people are only working on things that have meaning, and we need to figure out how we tie someone's job to a broader mission and how they serve humanity. And I would encourage you to continue to do that, and thank you for your work.
Any other questions from Mr. Pond?
I've got a quick question, and it may not fall under this operational piece, but about 1.5 years ago or so, we set up a program where we had a station ambassador, a station manager that was responsible for that station, or a team of people that had 2 or 3 stations, which was a great concept, George. And I really haven't heard any feedback. I was just curious, this might be a good spot to comment on how that program's going.
Well, thank you for the question. And yeah, we continue to build out that organization. In fact, I'm going to introduce you to someone that's going to be, very pivotal and prominent in making sure that we really continue to normalize and socialize that that process of making sure that we have ship and improve the customer. It's continues to be a work in progress. We are seeing things like increased engagement with the CIDs and other community leaders and jurisdictions and things like that. Increased collaboration with our partners in capital as we start these capital programs, making sure that they're interacting with, the subject matter experts of these stations. We're going to be doing work, and so pleased with the progress. We just want to keep that velocity and pace going on so that people that are in our stations see it, experience, feel it.
Any other questions? Mr. Bruno, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to agenda item number 3, we have a briefing on Transit Master version 19 and an update on that. Mr. Humphrey, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, members of the Operations Safety Committee. Let me direct your attention to item number 3, and I'll try to hold back my excitement on this. Next slide, please. So first, before I get started, I want to thank the IT team, our bus communications staff, customer service, and everybody that supported this effort. Back in 2015, we installed Transit Master version 16, and 7 years later, we're here to tell you that we successfully upgraded without issues this past weekend to version 19. And what this does for us, this is everything we do in bus. The operators log in, vehicles are tracked, our dispatchers can communicate back and forth with the operators through the MDTs, we can track our on-time performance, and we do our incident management through this version. This was this past weekend, so really excited. And next slide, please. Here's some of the features that we're going to have in this new version that we haven't had previously. In typical, and I'll try to make this, I'll go low level. So in the passenger app, we were running about 2 minutes behind on updates from the bus to the actual application for the riders. We're down to 5 seconds. And that's pretty exciting, so a lot more real-time information out there to the riders. Detours and situational challenges with the operators will be pre-planned. For example, if we see or have a big bus bridge or a big special event coming forward, we can pre-plan detours. That way when the operator's out there, the MDT will actually pick up the detour and give them turn-by-turn instructions live instead of by paper, which we currently use to hand out. So the mapping's good for the operators, easy to use. Color code adherence for on-time performance. As you can see in the screenshot, you've got an early with the yellow, so they'll know if they're running early. You got a green if they're on time, and a red if they're running late. This is really important because, again, paper doesn't show you the visuals we're going to have with the operator, so really easy for them to follow the maps. Kind of like Waze. If you use Waze on your phone, this is what this becomes. We're also going to be able to integrate the updates to social media, so if we have a bus problem or bus issue or service issue, once we hit the buttons, automatically updates social media, and also all our service alerts will go automatically instead of manual. Currently, this bus is going to be out of service. We have to manually update it. That goes away. So again, maps, they'll see the stops ahead of time. They'll know their arrival at the time points for the operators. And then we have what we call an Autoblock Cancellation feature, where if we have currently, it's a manual process. If we say we're not going to run a bus from like 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., we have to go in there and manually cancel each one of these trips. In the new system upgrade, we hit the button, automatically cancels and updates all the systems we have, including the real-time information to the passengers. And that's probably the biggest thing too. Another feature that we have is that customer service previously would have to call our dispatch office to get information on when the next bus is coming. So now they can actually see the bus in real-time service and have that information ready for them. So no more calls or less calls to dispatch when they want to get information on bus arrivals. So we just started this past weekend, really excited. Next slide. That's just the start. So our real-time and rider information is critical to transit. We've had an uptick in concerns with that, and really this push started before I got here, but we've really just pushing the buttons now to get us to real-time updates all through the system. So this migration to cellular, what that means for us,
is that instead of typically when you load routes, some of these routes have to get manually loaded into the buses with little devices, jump drives and so forth. And the other ones get loaded through access points at the garages. So the bus has to sit there, has to wait for the upload. Cellular means that we're going to be able to hit the buttons and the uploads will happen instantaneously instead of waiting for a Wi-Fi signal. So we're really excited about that. And then the rider application, within the next 2 weeks, everything's going to be that 3 to 5 second refresh for all the riders that use the application. So we're really excited about that one. And then for the future, we did put out an RFP. We've got 3 pilots that we're going to run it through the system in the next 90 days. And then we'll come back with a proposal for another system that is actually potentially a replacement of what we have that has all the cool creature features, as you call it, and all the updated technology, and that's currently in process. So we're excited about that as well. So a lot of movement to improve the rider experience, improve operator safety, and also streamline some of our manual processes. So next slide. And that was it. Short, brief, but I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. I push a lot for technology, and I think that it's important for all of us, and just really excited to be here for this, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Even though Ms. Aquina and I are the babies of the board, we are old enough to remember days without cell phones and GPS and printing out MapQuest and carrying it with you. I feel like we just went from the paper printouts of MapQuest into an era with GPS or Waze. So that is very exciting. Do we have any comments or questions from the board?
Very depressing.
Mr. Durrett.
If you worry about MapQuest, you know what a map is.
Yeah. Back in your days, Bill, that you just read the stars, right?
Funny.
Yeah, Bill carries a sextant in his in his wagon. Does this mean, as somebody who used to get a kick out of riding in a bus and checking to see where I was on the app and seeing that I was actually way behind where I really was, this is wonderful. This is really going to help a lot with the experience of the transit user. So I applaud you and the agency for taking this important step. Does this mean that if I'm using my Marta app now and I want to see real time where the bus is for route number 5, it should be approximately 5 seconds updating
Within
the icons of where the buses are?
Yes, sir. Within the next 2 weeks, we'll have it fully rolled out to the passenger app. Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mullis.
Yes, outstanding implementation of technology. My question is how we're going to advertise this across our platforms and let this information get out, and what type of budget are we planning for that advertising, and what platforms are we using?
I will say that our customer outreach team is already engaged in this. You may even see, I'm not sure if Adam's already done this, but we're doing it on the website, so that our customers who are regularly engaging with Marta are already starting to expect this. Important to make sure that, as Harold said, over the next 2 weeks, this gets rolled out into actual implementation. So we want to make sure that that is working as expected before we start to do a hard launch. But in terms of soft launch, our customer engagement teams are already working on making that happen.
Interim CEO, I think that this is going to be a big advantage to increase ridership, and it shows the agency on the cutting edge of technology. So I would encourage us, once we get the beta test out of the way, for us to have a robust advertising and engagement on this technology.
Thank you. And the other thing about this is that, especially when it comes to customer information, that is an offering that the customers already expect, right? So we've got to be, we're going to position this as it's not just now coming, you're going to get to see where your bus is, but what we're going to really expound upon is the reliability of the information we've been providing in the past. And when Harold talks about a lot of these automated processes that no longer require a manual intervention, because what happens in the middle of an emergency, for example, is you'll say, how come the customers didn't know? And that poor person that was busy doing 3 or 4 things more than they normally do was the one that was supposed to enter it into the system. The human all that goes away. So it's a reliability of an offering that we've already provided that really excites me. That, and you know, when you talk about the turn-by-turn, nothing alarmed me more than seeing a new driver on a route with a piece of paper in their hand, which is just, you know, from a safety perspective, the distraction and all of that. So again, it's increased reliability, increased safety, increased security, and yet Harold didn't do a great job of containing his excitement, but we share that excitement, and there'll be no end to the noise we make about it once we're sure of its reliability.
Ms. Scott.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you. This is very exciting information. Very exciting for all of us, and especially for those of us who used to use MapQuest and Atlas and all of that, just to get around 285, north, south, east, or west. I wonder if we could also, to make sure incorporating this in our jurisdictional briefings with our elected officials, and in doing that, then the elected officials can then share with their community organizations as well, and at their community meetings. I think that would be a good way to also get the information out.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. We will do that.
Mr. Farson.
Yeah, once again, this is a great advancement and an improvement. I know the operators will really appreciate this. I remember riding the bus and talking to one of the operators, and this was one of her issues right here, that they had to deal with the paper issue when it comes to a route that may be new to them. So this should be a huge tool for the operators to be able to use now and navigate and see where they're at on time and just communicate. So this is huge, Harold. Appreciate it very much. Great job. Thank you to the team. All right.
I will say to Mr. Greenwood's point, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I will say that somebody did tell me before I came in the room that your excitement could probably last all day talking to them, so try to make it quick, you know, so I just thought I'd share that bit.
Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, congratulations. Very, very good technology, and I appreciate the presentation about it. One, I wanted to ask a couple of, one technical question and a second. First is the app, if I have it on my phone, will it be updated automatically without having to download anything else? And two, inside the bus and the driver is actually operating the vehicle, is there a screen there that they can see easily in real time that shows them, you know, how quick, if they're on time and all that, this new screen that you have?
All right, so I'll answer the first technical question. The app currently reads off of the vehicles that are out there, but there is that delay. That delay gap will be closed. There's no need to update the application. And as far as the current system, you probably heard paper. On the buses, there is a big screen, and that screen probably needed some reconfiguring so that they can actually get the turn-by-turns on for visuals. So that itself will turn on so they can see exactly where they're going. So you're correct. It is a nice screen. It's about 10-inch monitor they can view, and we will remove the paper. We'll take a minute because there's some operators that, you know, they love to use the paper, but we'll definitely move away from the paper turn-by-turns that you've seen on the buses. That is the goal.
And does it have an audio feature, or does it, like Waze? I use Waze all the time.
It does have an audio feature, and it does have, again, just there's so many features and things we could talk about, but it will help with our AD announcements as well, because the operator will see them coming ahead of time instead of those being on paper as well. So when they get to that stop, they can hit the button. It'll make the announcement verbally for those that are visually impaired. So a lot of other features that we can talk about today, but maybe a later date.
Great. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ms. Aquana.
Sure. Thank you for this presentation. This is very exciting for Marta and for the region. I am interested, as we continue to work at the ATL with Marta and other operators on the ATL Rides app, how this data can feed into that. I know you mentioned some of this coming out for the Marta app in the next couple of weeks, and then I believe some pilot programs. So how does that all interplay?
Probably a good thing for us is have our IT team connect with Carlos Trios.
Okay, sure.
I think we can do that and make sure, because it would make sense that if we could regionalize it to where we all connect, I think that would be wonderful. So I
Okay.
can make that connection.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor Floyd.
How many Marta apps should I have on my phone? Is there just one?
It should be 2.
Two? And what, Marta, which I got, but what's the other, Reach?
The C and say something.
But there's a Marta Reach app too, is that right?
Well, it's a pilot. That actually ends at the end of this month, so you will no longer have to have that application. So that one is no longer needed. So
Well,
only
this-
2.
This stuff, if I go on my Marta app, is that where I get to the stuff that you've been talking about today?
That is correct.
Okay, and this button you keep talking about hitting, I don't have that on my phone, do I? Where?
You don't need to hit any buttons on your phone for seeing the turn-by-turns. You're good to go. It's just the
Bill.
operators.
Bill,
No,
your
get out of here, I don't want to, I'm sorry.
Bill, your grandchildren will show you.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm gonna have to do, but anyway, the Marta Reach is a great program, by the way, and I don't have it on my phone, but I have ridden, matter of fact, with the mayor of current mayor of Decatur, who said you ought to try this because it's really great. And that is extremely convenient, and she couldn't teach me how to do it, but she thinks, anyway, I hope that's not gonna end. Is that about to end? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, by design, Mayor Floyd, that was a pilot that we had promised a particular start, a particular end, so that we could learn about the product, so that when we come back with our redesigned bus network, we'll be able to integrate successful elements of Reach where required when the ultimate network is designed. But we really did need to learn about the program. We'll be coming back to the board shortly with the success metrics of the pilot and talking about how much ridership we had in each of the zones and what worked well and what didn't, and how it might come back in its integrated form with the bus network.
Okay, now, and just, I'm sorry, but you said the Marta app, and what was the other one you mentioned? CV?
See and say.
See and say?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry to be.
The chief can help you with the see and say app. Okay, no other matters on the agenda. I know Mr. Wright wants to make a formal introduction to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Worthy. I would like to ask Mr. Charles Hankerson to step up to the podium. Mr. Hankerson, or Hank, as he likes to be referred to, is our newest director in rail services. He will have oversight of the east-west line and our streetcar mode. So, Hank, just a couple of comments on your background and introduce yourself to the O&S committee.
Absolutely. Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, members of the Operations and Safety Committee. My name is Charles Hankerson, as Mr. Wright just stated, currently director for the East-West line, 1 month in. So pretty excited to be joining the authority, coming up from South Florida Regional Transit Authority from Miami, where I had the role of Director of Operations. I covered Miami to West Palm Beach, all facets of anything under operations. It's my intent and hope to bring the rail experience that I have to add value to Marta. Glad to be back home. I went to college for my undergraduate degree here, finished at Georgia State. Again, Director of Operations in South Florida. Prior to that, Vice President of Operations for Short Line Railroad, based in Boca Raton, Florida. Over a decade at Norfolk Southern. Also went up to Canadian Pacific, covering Toronto back to Winnipeg, all operations for that line as well. So again, it's great to be here to execute the vision of the leadership that we have. 1 month in, and I've been able to spend that time in the field, seeing a lot of great things and a really strong team. So please stand by for more to come. I expect to be delivering a lot of good news as we execute the vision and expectations of the board. So it's a pleasure to meet everybody, and I look forward to spending more time with you.
Hank, welcome.
Thank
We're
you.
thrilled to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
With no other matters to come before the Operations and Safety Committee, we will stand adjourned.
would like to move forward and go ahead and call to order the Business Management Committee meeting for Thursday, August 25th, 2022. Okay, everyone is signed in. We're good? All right, thank you. The first item on the agenda is approval of the July 28th, 2022 Business Management Committee meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve? It's been moved and it's been seconded. All right, can we have a vote? All right, thank you. The meeting minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda for the Business Management Committee meeting is a resolution authorizing the renewal of authorities' privacy and network cybersecurity liability insurance coverage for 2022 to 2023. Donna Jennings, Director of Risk Management, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Frierson, Mr. Durrett, Mr. Srinath, Mr. Greenwood, and members of the committee. Challenges beyond ransomware attacks are impacting the cybersecurity of organizations throughout the world. Over the last 12 to 18 months, there have been several high-profile cyber breach and ransomware attacks, including SolarWinds, MS Exchange, Accellion, and Log4j. All have had wide-ranging impacts, including damage to the reputation of the company and supply chain implications that cause ripple effects in the economy. A direct result of the increase in the frequency and severity of cyber attacks is the continued disruption of the cybersecurity insurance marketplace. I'm here today to request authorization to renew the authority's network security and privacy or cyber liability insurance coverage for a one-year period from September of 2022 to 2023. Next slide, please. And the purpose of my presentation is to provide the board with an understanding of the basics of cyber insurance coverage, to provide a high-level overview of the challenges driving the changes in the global insurance marketplace, and to discuss my recommendations for the renewal policy. And at the conclusion of my presentation, I will ask for the committee's approval of the resolution. Next slide, please. Moving on to the basics of cyber insurance. First, let's discuss exactly what privacy and network security liability or cyber insurance covers. The coverage is a bit unusual in that in the same policy it provides coverage for both first-party and third-party costs associated with a data breach or cyber attack. Most insurance policies typically provide coverage for one of the other, not both. First-party coverage helps to cover expenses resulting from a cyber attack or a breach on the authority's networks. And examples of first-party costs that are covered by the policy include the following: communicating with affected customers, providing credit monitoring services for customers, public relations and reputation management campaigns, and other recovery activities. Third-party coverage is like general liability coverage in that it covers legal expenses that result from the authority's failure or being blamed for causing another firm's cyber loss. And third-party costs include liabilities that arise out of a potential breach like regulatory defense costs, fines and penalties such as PCI or payment card industry fines, as well as network interruption costs and data restoration expenses. So in summary, the policy provides a variety of methods for mitigating the ultimate cost of a cyber event to the authority. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about let's move on to an overview of the challenges driving changes in the global cyber insurance market. Since 2019, there has been a significant uptick in ransomware attacks. The increasing sophistication and morphing nature of cyber attacks are reshaping claim development patterns, causing insurers to reevaluate rating models used to set prices that no longer accurately predict the cost of claims. Systemic risks are driving serious concerns pertaining to aggregation events like SolarWinds, MS Exchange, and Log4j, where one piece of malware or a vulnerability in a software can simultaneously affect thousands of organizations at one time. The cyber insurance market continues to contract in response to these losses. Insurers are pulling back the amount of coverage that they will provide due to the increased volatility from these large events. Insurers are charging significantly higher prices for their capital and deploying it much more selectively. So in summary, premium costs are increasing dramatically, and coverage availability is decreasing and even disappearing for many companies without robust controls and documented processes in place to mitigate loss from a cybersecurity event. Next slide, please. Finally, I'll discuss our renewal strategy and recommendations for the renewal of the 2022 to 23 policy. So our renewal strategy, as we watched the market conditions in this space continue to deteriorate over the last year, we knew that the 2023 renewal might be difficult. An important factor in our favor is that we have had cyber coverage since 2015, so we are not a new entrant to the market and have existing relationships with several underwriters. Because of the market conditions, we knew that we needed to start early, so we held our initial strategy meeting with our insurance broker Marsh and Marta's CISO and IT teams in early June, which is 4 months from the current policy's expiration date. To put the authority in the best position for this renewal cycle, the CISO and IT teams jointly completed the Marsh Cyber Assessment Tool, and this assessment evaluates an organization's cybersecurity maturity and provides information to the Marsh team to use in negotiation with the underwriters. Our insurance broker is out in the insurance markets as we speak, obtaining quotes for the coverage. Next slide, please. Moving on to my recommendations for this policy year renewal. The current policy has limits of $5 million with a $1 million self-insured retention and an annual cost of $295,031. And we expect the not to exceed cost of the renewal policy to be approximately $442,000, which is a potential increase of 50% over last year. And our goal as our negotiations continue is to drive down the cost of this policy as much as possible within the constraints of the marketplace. Next slide, please. Now to wrap things up, in my presentation I focused on 3 key areas. First, we talked about the basics of what cyber liability insurance actually covers. Second, I provided a high-level overview of the challenges driving this global cyber insurance market. And third, we discussed my recommendations for the renewal. And now I respectfully request the committee's approval of this resolution to renew the authority's cyber liability insurance coverage for a not-to-exceed cost of $442,500 for the policy period of September 15th, 2022 to 2023. Thank you for your time and attention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Appreciate it very much. Can I get a motion? Okay, it's been moved and second. Discussion. Are there any questions? Mr. Pond?
I've got one question, and I know you have companies that help you go through all of this. With $1 million deductible, that's $4 million of you're paying $400,000 for that. Is that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
$5 million policy, $1 million deductible.
Well, it's not a deductible, it's an SRR. So we would pay the first $1 million of any loss.
Right.
And then above that, the policy would provide $5 million of coverage.
So for that additional $4 million, you're paying?
It's 5.
5, you're paying how much?
Well, if it renews at the full-on quote for this year, $442,000, but I think it'll be less than that.
Okay. I know you do this, I'm just putting the mirror up. Is there any way you could increase or consider increasing the deductible? That's a pretty high number too.
It is all based on what the marketplace will bear and what the insurance carriers will provide as a product. So right now, $1 million is the retention level that they're offering. We can't get it any lower.
No, I wasn't suggesting lower.
So,
at all.
if we go higher, then, it depends on what's available in the marketplace.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Floyd?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't vote against this. I don't know who did that, but it wasn't me. Probably was me, but I didn't mean to do it. The limit of $5 million, is that something the market tells you, or is that something we selected?
Well, just the market tells us now. We used to have $20 million in coverage, and then all this other stuff that I talked about with these giant breaches from different things happened a few years ago, and then all of those opportunities for those kinds of limits for Marta as a public entity disappeared.
So our limit used to be, our policy used to be $20 million,
Yes, sir.
and now it's $5.
Yes, sir.
And that
That's a
reduction
market condition.
is a result of what the insurance companies got
Well-
involved in and
Well, it's a
stuff
result
like
of the marketplace and the losses that they can't accurately price the product for. So, because they're so large and cover so many things. So, yeah, the marketplace is dictating that right now.
Okay, from an insurance company standpoint, do they require Marta to do something, or anybody to do some things? I mean, we'll give you this policy, but you got to do this, this, and this that you're not doing. Do they get into that kind of depth?
Yes, sir, they do.
So
in this-
they're telling you some things that you've got to keep up with or do in order to keep this policy?
Yes, sir.
And what type things are those?
The cyber assessment maturity tool that we used took the CISO team and the IT group through a variety of questions that meet the best practices that are out there under a NIST framework. And we have to be able to show the insurance carriers that we have at least a minimum of those best practices in place to even get a quote for coverage. Like if we didn't have, sorry, my brain is drawing a blank on what I'm trying to tell you. Like endpoint protection and not Dwayne. Help me out.
Good morning. I can answer a little bit better. So they follow a framework when they do our assessment, and we have to kind of map where we are at within that framework. So they make suggestions. Well, it's not suggestions. The framework has what they call controls that we have to meet. And as we've been building the program over the years, we've been following that framework to try and meet those controls. So they might say, okay, you've met one of these controls, but you really should be doing X, and everything we do brings our maturity score up and reduces our risk.
Okay,
That
so it
answers the
might be
question.
things like you do these penetration tests and that kind of thing. There might be.
It's more of whether you're doing it like encryption, whether you're doing multi-factor authentication,
That's what I was trying to think.
whether you're managing your backups correctly, whether you're testing those, how can you recover quickly, what's your recovery like, your resiliency. There's like 5 pillars that they use, and there's controls under each of those. So whether you can identify attacks and how quickly you can respond to attacks.
Okay, is there any kind of a system where you hear about other people who are cyber attacks and what they've done, how they've done? Does the insurance company do anything like that? Like we've got 5,000 of these policies, 300 of them got attacked this way last week. Or is there any kind of system like that?
So I don't know if the insurance companies look at that, but
Somebody does.
We constantly get, or my team constantly gets updates from the feds, and I'm part of a consortium of CISOs for transit, so we do a lot of talking about what we're seeing and what controls we're putting in place. But the feds are constantly sending us updates. So if you look at Solar Winds or the Colonial Pipeline attack, there's controls that they could have had in place to mitigate some of those attacks. The Solar Winds one was, again, more controls, no default passwords, all these little kind of fundamental things that people should be doing that they're not, and a lot of times doing, that lead to these breaches.
Is there any kind of requirement on Marta to report cyber attacks to the
Yeah.
federal government or anybody?
So the FTA came down December with a security directive, and part of that directive says we need to report any and all attacks within 24 hours to the TSA or CISA.
Okay. And is there ever an instance where Marta would get a cybersecurity attack and this board wouldn't know, or would there not be, is it?
I would say if it's constitutes an incident that requires me to spin up an incident team, the board would know. If it's somebody's machine has a piece of malware that we removed, no, because the leadership doesn't even know. That's day-to-day kind of maintenance type of
Okay,
stuff.
just tell me what that incident.
So if we had a ransomware outbreak,
So even if it didn't work, if it was tried but it didn't work,
if it tried and didn't work, we know, it's just kind of the day of doing business.
so we wouldn't probably hear about that
No.
then. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, Mr. Mullis.
Thank you. I know it's a tricky time in this environment. Just a quick question. Our umbrella policy will not cover or provide any additional coverage for the cyber.
That's correct.
So
This
5
is
million.
5 million is it, unless we can increase the limits.
And we're on our own.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of us from the city of Atlanta probably had some experience with the city of Atlanta and their attack.
Yes, sir.
Can you kind of talk to the magnitude of that attack and how this would impact that?
The magnitude of City of Atlanta's attack?
The economics involved with the city of Atlanta's attack. I thought it was a very costly attack.
So from my understanding is it cost upwards of $17 million to do that remediation, but part of that also, they are doing constant monitoring, and last I heard that was about a $2 million a year cost to SecureWorks. So I couldn't give you actual numbers on what it cost because they were kind of tight on that, but the last number I saw was at $17 million, and there were systems that they said they would never get back.
My point with asking that question is that I think that we may want to get some best practices from the city of Atlanta since our limits are so low and our exposure is so high. I'd like us to coordinate to see what happened and see if we can incorporate those best practices.
Yeah, my understanding from the city of Atlanta breach was there was outwardly facing systems that were not patched. Oh, sorry. What my understanding is there was internet facing systems that were not patched, and that's how the breach happened. So I work with Kirk's team consistently to make sure at least that first line is patched so that we're not exposing ourselves unnecessarily out to the internet. But I've spoken with, I've spoken with the previous CISO back after the breach on some of the things that they were doing. But definitely we'll make that contact to them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? All right, yeah, Mr. Snyder.
Yeah,
I
thank
can't
you,
see your
Mr.
light if you.
No, you're good.
You're good.
Very
Okay, thank you.
Just one policy-related question. So if there is an incident and we send a notice to the insurance carrier, on the policy, are there exclusions that will keep us from getting coverage? And if there are, what are they?
There are always exclusions in insurance policies.
Yep.
I would have to go back and look at those exclusions to be able to answer it intelligently. So I don't want to go off the cuff, but essentially we purchased this coverage so that we have access to the breach response services in an immediate manner, and that we can fund that breach response immediately without going into our revenue streams to do that. So, but I can certainly look at the policy and get back to you, but I wouldn't want to but there's always exclusions in insurance policies, but.
Right. Well, just to segue on that, we checked the box on everything we needed to get the policy in place.
Yes, sir.
So in theory, if we're doing everything that we were required to do in the first place, then we should be good if we have an incident.
Yes, sir.
In theory.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it very much. I know that, once again, she mentioned several years ago, we had a higher level of a policy, and the marketplaces have changed. I asked the same questions. How can we continue to have the coverage that we need, but the market conditions are what we're dealing with? That's my comment. Any other comments from the board members? Okay, hearing none. You have before you a resolution. Can I get I call the question for the motion for the resolution. Okay. Okay, the resolution has passed. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it very much, Ms. Jennings. Okay, next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing modification in the contractual authorization for the services contract with Talent Connections, LLC, LOA, L50057. Lou Burrell, Chief Administrative Officer, CAO, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman Frierson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the board. I am here to request for your consideration a resolution to authorize the modification of a contractual agreement with a resource provider called Talent Connections. Talent Connections provides personnel resources for staff augmentation purposes, in this particular case directed to our Human Resources Department. We have had a prolonged circumstance in our Human Resources Department where we had initiated the recruitment and hiring of an AGM of HR, but unfortunately the first effort failed due to the withdrawal of the selected candidate. We also had a new director of Human Resources who, unfortunately, after being with us for about a year, found a different position and left. And so that has left our HR department needing staff augmentation in order to maintain the operations. So we have utilized Talent Connections for this purpose. So what I am asking for you to consider is to increase, to extend the contractual agreement we have with this company for 6 more months, and to add $180,000 to this contract. The question of whether or not we are paying fair and reasonable costs for this staff augmentation came up during the committee meeting, and we promised Mr. Frierson and Mr. Durrett that we will have our audit team conduct an audit and a review of those, and they have since done that and have fortunately concluded that these are fair and reasonable costs. Please, next slide, please. Thank you so much. So you can see the details of the request. Six more months, $180,000 added to the contract for a total value of, this is an 18-month now agreement of $408,500. Next slide, please. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. May I have a motion? Okay, it's been moved. And it's been seconded by Mr. Durrett. All right, question from the board. No questions from the board members? Mr. Palmer.
I'm sure it was there, but I didn't see it. Exactly what is this organization doing? Just a whole number of different things? Are they doing recruiting or what? It's hard for me to grasp exactly what we're paying for.
So they provide us with professionals, direct contract professionals to support us in the roles of interim AGM of HR, and they have also provided services for recruitment.
So we're getting X number of bodies or positions for that amount of money? One body and staffing recruitment.
So that's Calvin Wright, right? You want to just
correct.
Just explain Calvin's
Yeah,
title?
Yeah, he's the interim AGM of HR.
And then in addition to that, the assistance with the recruitment comes from a number of staff resources that they loan out?
Yes.
And so,
wait, Mr. Durrett.
Luz and Kali, is it our belief that by the end of February of next year, we should have identified somebody to bring in as AGM of HR?
Yes, it is. We have reinitiated a new search, and in fact, hope that we will have in place a new AGM sooner than that, and that we could facilitate a transition process. And that's why we extended it for 6 months. Hopefully, we will not have to utilize all of it, but we want it to be safe.
You anticipated my second question, which is you can get out of it if you have your person in place. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mullis.
Yes, I want to thank you for your hard work in this very, very tough environment in recruiting people. And are there any more resources? Because we have a big deficit here. We want to make sure you're one of our top people inside of the organization and making sure that we have reliable services. Are there any more resources that we can get you so you can do this? I know this is a trying time, and we want to make sure we resource you properly, okay?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Greenwood and myself have had conversations about the importance of creating, strengthening our benchmark and our systems within the HR department and our personnel within key departments. And we have been engaged precisely in doing that. And we have had some moderate but good successes in that regard. We have recently hired a new manager of benefits. We also hired a new manager on our compensation team, and are in the process of bringing in additional resources there. So you're absolutely correct and very much in line with the conversations we have been having at the leadership level.
Yeah, and we thanks to Raj's great work, we have a great surplus. So it's spending it on people, okay?
Thank you. Will do.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burrell. Appreciate it very much. So I'll call the question for the resolution. Okay, the resolution has passed. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And the last item on the agenda is a briefing of a preliminary unaudited FY 2022 year-end financial highlights. Greg Patterson, Senior Director of Budget and Grants, and Carrie Rocha, Deputy Program Manager of Capital Programs Delivery.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Something last minute came up. Mr. Patterson couldn't be here. I'll go through the presentation and turn it over to Carrie at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Before I launch on the presentation, I want to bring your attention to the footnote on the first slide. I know it's small. It's critical that I mention that these numbers are preliminary, unaudited, and subject to change depending on the audit result. Although I don't expect any material changes, I thought it was important to point that out. For the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022, our revenues were higher by about $133.7 million compared to our budget, and the expenses were lower by about $41 million, bringing the net surplus to $177 million. If you go to the next slide, I'll go through some of the highlights of why we experienced this positive variance. On the revenue side, it's been predominantly two things. Number one, our sales tax revenues have been extremely robust. This is something I've talked about the last 12 months or so. The second big reason for the positive variance is the stimulus funding we received from the feds. So both were primarily responsible for that. However, I do want to point out and talk a little bit about one of the items of the passenger revenues. Although the numbers are not that huge, we ended the year with $63.5 million in passenger revenues compared to our budget of $60. As I said, the numbers may not be huge, but the message is pretty significant. And this translates to about 12.3% fare box revenue recovery ratio. Pretty quickly, fare box recovery revenue ratio is how much of passenger revenues is covers our operating expenses.
In other words, the numerator is passenger revenues, the denominator is our, operating expenses. So it covers about 12.3% of that. Just to put that in context, last year, fiscal year 21, it was about 10.3%. So definitely, trend in the right direction. And pre-COVID, that's fiscal year 2019, the last full fiscal year pre-COVID, it was about 25.3%. So about half of what it was pre-COVID. However, we have seen some improvement compared to 21. Sure.
While you're here, the reason why the actual amount of COVID stimulus funds used is so much more than what we budgeted.
I'll be happy to expand on that. When we formulated the budget and the board approved that, we were planning on using a significant portion of ARP funds for capital. However, after the budget was passed by the board, we received guidance from FTA that we could not use any of the ARP funds for capital projects because in the previous year, since in the start of COVID, not Marta, but one of its subcontractors had laid off some employees. And that was one of the reasons the FTA came out with the guidance. Since you have done that, not me, or subcontractor, you cannot use that for capital. So we had to use all of that for operating. But in essence, it did not change anything. It's only the color of money that changed. It freed up sales tax revenues.
Thank you.
Mr. Dorrit, you have a comment?
Raj, could you say something about the lease income? That's a significant above budget item there, and I'd like to understand a little bit more.
Certainly, no, I did not. Thank you for bringing it up. It was a one-time event. Marta entered into certain what are called sale-leaseback transactions way back in the early 2000s. That transaction was terminated, and pursuant to that transaction, Marta had deposited some monies in the escrow account, which got released, and that's why it's a one-time. Will not repeat again. Yeah.
Mr. Floyd, I'm sorry, you have more questions?
No.
You good? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And on the expense side, again, it's predominantly the vacancies. At the end of the year, we had about 644 vacant positions, and that created a pretty good favorable variance for us, and commensurate reduction with the benefits as well because of the lower thing. Everything else, the materials and supplies, in spite of huge increases we saw in gas, natural gas, and diesel expenses, we were pretty much flat or in line with the budget. Very minor, unfavorable variance. That's largely because of the hedge program we had on our natural gas and diesel. If you go to the next slide, this is just for the month of June. Again, the revenues were higher, and the reasons were the same as what I mentioned earlier for the year-to-date results. And the expenses were slightly unfavorable. And if you go to the next slide, the reasons for that being, again, some of the contractual expenses related to diesel and natural gas. Next slide, please. One more. Here is a chart of our, passenger revenues. The red line is the budget, and the blue bar charts are the actual results on passenger revenues, and the gray bar charts are last year's passenger revenues. As you can see, barring 2 months, that's January and February, our passenger revenues in total outperformed our budget, or at least was at budget in some months. And January, February, due to the resurgence of the COVID-19 or the Omicron variant, wherein a lot of offices went back to remote work, including Marta for some time during that period. So that resulted in a little bit lower revenues than what we had planned for. Barring those 2 months, passenger revenues have been either at or above budget. If you go to the next slide, and the bus and the rail ridership, we have 2 different stories here. Bus ridership, barring, I think, the month of July and October, have been consistently lower. There are a host of reasons for that, including, availability of our operators and all that contributed to lower ridership. And on the rail, it's very positive news. If you go to the next slide, again, except for January, February, where our rail passenger ship was at budget,
pretty much every other month, we have been at or above budget on the rail passenger ridership. And that concludes my portion of the presentations. Unless there are any questions, I'll turn it, yeah.
I just, I note that overtime expenses for the year are $1.2 million less than budgeted, and I remind us that, well, for the 11 years I've been on the board, the overtime expenses have exceeded our budget, and we've always going, can we get a handle on this? Can we get a handle on this? And I know it's a complex situation given workforce and everything, but it's really nice to see that we're actually under budget on that expense item. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
Thank you. Carrie Rocha will go through.
Mr. Pond has a question.
I'm sorry.
Hold on one moment, Mr.
Apologize.
Pond.
The important point to that presentation, if you went back to the first slide or second slide, we talked about $172 million in COVID, which was 25% of the revenues. So the important piece, from my view, probably one of the most important things we need to think about is 1, 2, 3 years from now. So that's 25% of your revenues that's going to go away at some point. I think you've got it baked in for a couple of years. So I'm not sure you have an answer today, but that's a critical issue that's going to have to be dealt with long term.
Absolutely. I mean, that'll continue this fiscal year into 23, and after 24, it pretty much goes away. Yes, we'll have some of the unspent monies left over that may carry us for another year or two. The expectation is that, passenger revenues will pick up in the next 2 years. I mean, we're seeing a positive trend. I don't want to get too excited, with an increase of about 10% over last year. Over budget. But definitely it's moving in the right direction. And again, the expectation is that in about 2 to 3 years, by the time we exhaust all of the stimulus funds, passenger ridership and revenues would have come back to pre-COVID levels. Yeah. Gary, if you want to go through the capital slides, if you can move to the next one. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Raj. Looking at the sources and uses for the capital side, as you can see, our total sources of funds for our budget was $642, and actual sources was $510 million. Under the uses, the total uses was budgeted at $639 million, of which $478 million was spent. If you move to the line, just 2 lines above where it says subtotal for CIP, that's the subtotal for the capital program, we spent $335 million out of the $481 million that was budgeted, so we spent roughly 70% of our budget last year. I will note that that was a pretty drastic improvement the way we had gone into the end of last year, and I know we've been to the board speaking about this a number of times and how we could improve that delivery, and so we were very pleased to at least get to the 70% level this year. Obviously, we've talked about the budgeting moving forward and much more robust budget that was put together this year. Next slide. These are our top 10 projects. A number of them we've already spoken about at this at the board meetings. Railcar purchases obviously is our top budgeted item, and we actually did come out with a spend of $61 million. Some of these we are in the process of just finalizing the allocation of budget for FY23. Sometimes we do, for FY22. Sometimes we do through our change control board shift monies where we need them in order to not exceed the budget. So you'll see some of them did exceed the final budget, and we are working with our change control board to make sure that those are indeed in place. The Clayton bus facility real estate, as you know, we had a very late in the fiscal year transaction that happened as we moved into the real estate for those properties, and I believe it's a total of $37 million roughly. One of the lines, which is the line that's here, is the line out of our State of Good Repair program. There's also the Clayton corresponding line out of the Clayton account. So this is just for the State of Good Repair line, and you'll see that that spend did actually happen in FY22. Again, looking at our major construction projects like our TR4 project that progressed very, very well throughout the year. station rehabilitation had an underspend, but still was able to achieve $15 million last year, as they're mostly in the design process. Looking at TCSU, and elevators and escalators is another one that we've highlighted throughout the year. And I believe that's my last slide.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Appreciate it very much. Any questions from the board? All right, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Just really, this is a comment, I guess, more for colleague. The new rail car purchase, I know that's been in the works for a while, but I'd like kind of to get an update or status report about where we are on that process, because just speaking to Roger's report about ridership and everything, I think that will help spur ridership, but I'd just like to know kind of a timeline of when we are expecting that to come online.
Will do. We can bring an updated briefing. Just in short, I will say the first car body was photographed coming off the line 2 days ago in Switzerland. So Stadler is very optimistic about sticking to schedule. And so trying to remember, I think that schedule has us bringing the first car into Atlanta in 2024. And, you know, so that starts, there's a lot of work to be done with that first one, running in revenue, running in non-revenue, and bringing on the spade of the balance of our fleet, you know, over the next several years. But we are still on schedule. Budget is still as established earlier on, and there has been very minimal in terms of scope creep when it comes to things that we needed to do. So it was one of those measure twice, cut once. There was a lot of work done up front, but 2 days ago, you know, we all kind of went sigh of relief because that first physical piece of evidence of progress is rolling off the line.
Great. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you. Appreciate it very, very much. Any other comments from the board?
Well, and having just been to Stadler, I will say that the floor in that place is covered right now with California rail cars. At some point in time, it'll be Marta cars, and I'm hopeful. We talked a little bit while we were out there, Rod and Rita, I know, Jim, about some sort of an event where you stand up on that and you look down and you see Marta cars down there, and that is probably the first step to where the public will begin to realize that there's something significant about to happen. Because it's very impressive, their floor and the work that they do is absolutely very impressive. And it will be to everybody once they begin to realize the steps. Because right now, you're just right. Nobody understands that we've just spent $60 million on this, and we don't really have anything to show for it yet, other than this picture in Hungary or wherever it is, that car body coming off the line. So anyway, that's a good point, and it is something I think that we need to focus on maybe at some point in time, some sort of an event where people of Atlanta are standing in that car and do that, because it is a big deal. I agree with you 100%.
We are excited about that day. That day will soon come. All right, any other comments from the board? Hearing none, then I can call this meeting to adjourn. Thank you, board members.